in just a few seconds, inshallah. So 7 seconds. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. We're going to start the 9th hadith in the 40 nawawi hadith. And the hadith goes as follows. عن أبي هريرة عبد الرحمن بن صخر رضي الله تعالى عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوه وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم فإنما أهلك الذين من قبلكم كثرة مسائلهم واختلافهم على أنبيائهم رواه البخاري ومسلم. I'm going to read it again. عن أبي هريرة عبد الرحمن بن صخر رضي الله تعالى عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوه وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم فإنما أهلك الذين من قبلكم كثرة مسائلهم واختلافهم على أنبيائهم. So this hadith is basically discussing a very important issue, which is when it comes to the different duties in Islam, how do we know how to prioritize the do's and the don'ts? Do we first start with the don'ts, or do we first start with the do's? And although this may be confusing, especially if the person is new on the path of Islam and new to that or not familiar with a lot of the different regulations in Islam, and especially if you weren't born Muslim, this can be very confusing. What should I start with? And the Prophet ﷺ is making it really easy by saying, مَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَجَتَنِبُوا. What I ordered you to leave, in other words, what I forbid, that is the Prophet ﷺ, what I forbid you to do, فَجْتَنِبُوا, then leave instantly. فَجْتَنِبُوا. But the word فَجْتَنِبُوا, it doesn't really mean to leave, it more means to abstain from, to make a barrier between you and that particular matter. وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ, and what I ordered you to do, فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, then do what you're able to do. What you're able to do. فَإِنَّمَا, so here, فَإِنَّمَا أَهْلَكَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. فَإِنَّمَا would mean the reason why many of the nations before you were destructed كَثْرَةُ مَسَائِلِهِمْ was because they were questioning their prophets too much, or they were disagreeing, but not only disagreeing, but they were objecting, or they were doing things that are different from the orders that their prophets had come with. Now, a few matters to look at in this hadith. Number one, which is the narrator. The narrator himself is Abu Hurairah, Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr. Now, when we want to look at Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr, we're going to here go to Tarjumat al-Rawi. Tarjumat al-Rawi would mean the narrator himself and just some information about the Rawi. You could see that al-Rawi himself was his name used to be Abd Shams ibn Sakhr. His name used to be Abd Shams ibn Sakhr. But the Prophet ﷺ had changed his name to Abu Hurairah. Now the word Abu Hurairah, which is the narrator's name, the word Abu Hurairah means, it's a nickname to mean the father of the kitten. The word Hurairah would mean kitten, not cat, but a kitten. So it's basically a baby cat. But the reason why he was nicknamed with that was because he used to have this kitten that he would always always take care of. Or some scholars said it wasn't one kitten, it was actually many kittens that he was always surrounded with, and those kittens would always be on his back, on his shoulders. He was always having this kitten pet. His name used to be Abd Shams, but the Prophet ﷺ changed his name to Abu Huraira, or Abdul Rahman actually. So his name Abdul Rahman was the name that the Prophet ﷺ had given him. Why? Because when it comes to the names themselves would actually reveal some things about you, and there are things that make up your identity. So the Prophet ﷺ changed the names that had either one, so let's make some issue about names. So either the names that the Prophet ﷺ had changed some of the names had shirk in them. So the names that he would change are the names that had shirk in it, just like Abd Shams, because the word Abd Shams would mean that he worships the sun. And there were some Arab that worshipped the sun. Or Abdillat, so he would change their name because they had shirk, or because they had some bad influence, some bad connotation to the person. So the Prophet ﷺ, because one woman, her name went ugly, the Prophet ﷺ changed her name to mean beautiful. And there were other instances where the Prophet ﷺ actually changed their name in order to bring about a good effect and a good impact on the person. And here, just like Abu Huraira, the Prophet ﷺ changed his name from Abd Shams into Abdul Rahman, from the name meaning the worshipper of the sun to the worshipper of the Lord Almighty Ar-Rahman. The other part about Abu Huraira, just a story, is that Abu Huraira actually became Muslim when he was 28 years old, so quite old, unlike many of the other Sahaba. The other part is that Abu Huraira himself actually has a number of stories with the Prophet ﷺ. One of those stories is that the story of the milk, let's call it that way. What happened is that the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Huraira, he was extremely hungry because he was part of the people that were called Ahl al-Suffa. I'm going to write the name right here. They were called Ahl al-Suffa. Now, the reason why they were called Ahl al-Suffa, this is the word Ahl al-Suffa. And the reason why they were called Ahl al-Suffa, so one, some scholars said was because they were aligned in a certain place in the masjid. So they were extremely poor, homeless. They didn't even have the means to simple living, and a number of them were living in the masjid, and really in one corner in the masjid. That was their place. Their numbers were fluctuating from 300 to a couple, to some tens of Sahaba. And these Sahaba, Ahl al-Suffa, they were called so because one, they were on the edge of the masjid. Two, that they were actually that they didn't really have, the simple means of life. Now, Ahl al-Suffa were so poor that at many times they were seeing that their bodies started building crust of dust. They didn't have not water, not food, none of that. So at many times they were just living on people's donations. They had become Muslim, but they didn't have any means, any resources to live on after losing their connection with the people that they were part of their tribe. So they were disowned by their families. They only had one family, and that's the Muslim family. But even the Muslim family, they too were also living on the edge or in fact in severe poverty. So Abu Huraira himself, because he was living on the edge of poverty, he was many times shy to request for food. So one of those stories is that he was, he was standing in the middle of the road, and he thought, well, maybe I can, make up a question, and maybe somebody will invite me over just to answer the question for me. But his main concern was not the question. His main concern was the food. So he sees Umar ibn al-Khattab in the middle of the way, and then he again makes up a question, goes to Umar ibn al-Khattab, asks him the question, and then he answers the question and just walks away. Then he's like, okay, he didn't understand what I really meant with that. I was really hoping for food. So then he sees Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq sees him again. Abu Bakr, then he stops Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, asks him the same question. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq answers the question and then continues walking. But then he sees the Prophet ﷺ. He felt really maybe disappointed, hurt that he wasn't really invited for any food, even though, he was extremely hungry. So then he saw the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ is the Prophet. So he sees the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ didn't even say anything. He just says, Abu Huraira, come on over. He takes Abu Huraira and then he gets some milk and gives Abu Huraira. But Abu Huraira is extremely hungry at that moment. So he just tells Abu Huraira, here, take this milk and go give Ahl al-Suffa. So go give the people that are in the masjid, the homeless that are in the masjid. And he said, let them drink. And then, of course, don't drink until I come. So Abu Huraira is holding the milk and he's extremely hungry. So he says, I took the milk and I was so hungry, but I had to implement the Prophet ﷺ's order. So he goes, and then every single Sahabi is drinking. He gives each one the amount to drink. And then he's looking at the jug that was with milk inside of it, and he was thinking that it's probably finished. I'm going to be the last one. What's going to happen? And then the Prophet ﷺ comes over, and then the Prophet ﷺ tells him, "Baqitu ana wa ant." He said, everybody drank, and it's just me and you. So here it is. Abu Huraira is extremely hungry. The Prophet ﷺ, Abu Huraira gives him to drink. And then Abu Huraira is really, concerned, looking at the jug. What's going to happen? Now there's nothing going to be left for me. So the Prophet ﷺ then gives Abu Huraira and says, drink. Abu Huraira, the Prophet ﷺ, says, sit and drink. So Abu Huraira sits and starts drinking and drinks more. And then the Prophet ﷺ tells him, drink more. So Abu Huraira drinks more. And then the Prophet ﷺ orders him again. So Abu Huraira just in the end says, وَالَّذِي بَعَثَكَ بِالْحَقِّ لَا أَجِدُ لَهُ مَسْلَكَ. O Prophet of Allah, by the one that sent you with the truth, I don't have any more space in my stomach to drink anymore. This is one story of Abu Huraira, in witnessing and living with the Prophet ﷺ and having that privilege to be amongst the people, that are inside the masjid. And when we say inside the masjid, that would mean door to door with the Prophet ﷺ, and right next to the Prophet ﷺ's chambers. Abu Huraira learns from the Prophet ﷺ and narrates more than 7,000 ahadith. Although he had become Muslim in the 7th year Hijrah, but was actually one of the most companions to narrate the most ahadith. Now, Abu Huraira later, of course, becomes one of the major ghulam, one of the major leaders within the Muslim Ummah, and he narrates the hadith, مَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. What I ordered you to leave, then put a barrier, let there be a barrier. That's the word فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ means you make a complete barrier, you distance yourself from all that. Now this is really important to say, because we get a lot of people that would think that any haram in Islam, that it should only have one word, and that word, they would think that it should say that something is haram, that it should say that this is haram, that it should actually use the word haram. And this